Listen to that sound. That is the sound of an earthquake wrapped in aluminum. Today, we are talking about radial versus flat. Why aviation abandoned the greatest engines ever built. 80 years ago, American engineers built an absolute monster. The Radial engine was a fire-breathing beast designed to take a direct hit from anti-aircraft flak over Germany, lose 2 cylinders, and still drag a bomber back home. It was indestructible. It was a masterpiece of brute force survival. But look at airplanes today. We replaced that invincible iron giant with the flat engine, a quiet, polite little motor designed to fit inside a sleek plastic cowling. We traded survival for aerodynamics. We traded a roaring lion for a humming sewing machine. But there is a hidden, terrifying aerodynamic truth that forced this switch, and it was not just about saving money. Why did we kill the ultimate flying machine, and what did we actually lose when the radial engines went silent? Get your eyes right down on the crankcase, and you will see the heart of the beast, the master rod. This isn't some dainty piece of jewelry. This is a forged steel backbone, thick as your wrist, designed to take a hammering and keep spinning. In a 9-cylinder radial, like the Pratt Whitney R985, only one piston gets the honor of riding the master rod. The rest, 8 of them, hang on for dear life, each pinned to the master like spokes on a wagon wheel. Every time the crankshaft turns, that master rod orchestrates the dance. One short, beefy crank throw. No long, twisting shaft running through the block. No parade of offset journals like you'll find in a flat engine. Just one central hub, spinning with the kind of mechanical confidence that makes you want to salute. Here is the trick that makes radials so brutally effective: rotational inertia. A flat engine, say a Lycoming 6-cylinder, spreads its power across a long crankshaft with 6 separate throws. That means more weight, more flex, more chance for torsion to build up and rob you of punch when you need it most. But the radial, the master rod, keeps everything tight and close to the center. That is why the crank in a radial can be 2 to 3 times lighter than what you would find in an equivalent flat. Less mass spinning means faster response when you slam the throttle, less twisting force fighting against itself, and fewer places for damage to start a death spiral. There is a kind of mechanical poetry in watching a master rod assembly come together. Each articulating rod pivots on its own pin, tracing perfect circles as the engine spins. No wasted motion, no extra weight out where it cannot help. It is a system built for war, designed to shrug off battle damage and keep firing. That is why, when you hear old-timers talk about engines that could run with a couple of cylinders shot away, it is not a tall tale. The master rod made it possible. This is kinetic supremacy, forged in steel and proven at altitude. If you want to understand why the radial earned its reputation for unkillable iron, start right here at the center of the storm. Back in the roaring 20s, the radial engine did not just show up, it laid down a challenge. Cooling was the nightmare that haunted every early aviator. Inline engines boiled over, cylinders warped, and more than a few barnstormers found themselves gliding down with a seized-up lump of iron up front. But the radial laughed at heat. With every cylinder facing straight into the slipstream, air rushed across those finned barrels like a cold river, stripping heat away before trouble could start. No water jackets, no radiators to puncture or freeze, just honest, open-air cooling, as simple and effective as a windmill on a prairie. The proof was not just in blueprints or sales brochures, it came on the test stand. In 1925, the Wright J5 Whirlwind was put through a trial that would make most engines beg for mercy. 225 horsepower, flat out, for 300 hours straight. That is, 12.5 days at full throttle, pistons hammering, oil sizzling, and not a single cylinder giving up. When Charles Lindbergh picked his engine for the Spirit of St. Louis, he did not gamble on the J5. He bet on a known survivor. The J5 had already circled the globe in Ford trimotors and carried mail through ice and sand, racking up a reputation for running clean and cool when others choked. This was the era when reliability meant survival, not just convenience. Every hour in the logbook was a badge of honor. Mechanics trusted the Radial because it did not hide its weaknesses. If a cylinder started to run hot, you could see it, smell it, fix it on the spot. No hidden coolant leaks, no mystery failures, just iron, air, and fire, locked in a spinning handshake. That is how the Radial built its pedigree, by refusing to quit, no matter how long the run. Before the world ever heard of dogfights or flak, the Radial had already proven it could outlast anything the sky could throw at it. Try to kill a Radial engine with a single bullet. Go ahead, take your best shot. You can rip a chunk out of one cylinder, blow a hole straight through the fins, and that engine will still drag you home, spitting oil and running rough, but running. The secret isn't just brute strength, it's the way a Radial cools itself. Every cylinder out in the breeze, every fin washed in slipstream air. No coolant to leak, no radiator to puncture, no plumbing to burst in a panic climb, just iron, aluminum, and the wind. Now put that up against a liquid-cooled V12, like the Merlin in the Mustang. That engine is a thoroughbred, sleek, powerful, but temperamental. Take a hit to the radiator, and you are on a countdown. 2, maybe 3 minutes before the coolant boils off, oil temperature spikes, and the whole block locks up tighter than a rusted nut. Wartime records are blunt about it. A single 7.92mm round through the radiator could turn a $50,000 fighter into a glider before the pilot even finished his Mayday call. The numbers don't lie. Merlin-powered Mustangs and Spitfires lost as many as 1 in 4 aircraft to coolant loss after a single hit. With a Radial, the worst-case scenario is ugly, but survivable. B-17s limped home with entire cylinders missing. The R-1820s still thumping along on 7 out of 9 cylinders. P-47 Thunderbolts took flak through the cowl, lost oil pressure, and still had enough muscle to claw for altitude. Mechanics would find shrapnel buried in the heads, fins bent, spark plugs shot away, but the engine would fire up again after a patch job and a fresh load of oil. That's the asymmetric advantage, air-cooled survivability. No radiator means no Achilles heel. The cooling system is the engine itself, and the engine is built to take a beating. In a world where every extra minute of flight could mean the difference between a prisoner of war camp and a hot meal back at base, that's not just clever engineering. That's the difference between coming home and never coming home at all. Picture a B-17 coming back from Schweinfurt, October 1943. Mission 306. Flak and fighters had chewed that formation to pieces. One of those fortresses, Piccadilly Lily, limped home with 3 cylinders blown clean off her number 2 engine. That's a third of the power gone, pistons exposed to the slipstream, oil pouring out like a busted dam. The pilot logs it straight. Engine ran rough, but pulled 20,000 feet on 7. That's not a myth. That's the master rod doing its job, holding the line while the rest of the world falls apart. You want another? Take a P-47 Thunderbolt over France. Those jugs were flying tanks, each one packing an R-2800 under the cowl. Flak bursts, 15mm rounds, shrapnel the size of your thumb, it didn't matter. Mechanics would open up the cowl after a mission and find fins bent, spark plugs shot away, sometimes whole cylinder heads with daylight showing through. Yet the engine would still fire up, still pull enough power to get a battered pilot back over the channel. Field logs from the 8th Air Force tell it straight. P-47s came home with as few as 12 of 18 cylinders still firing. Try that with a liquid-cooled inline, see how far you get. Out in the dispersal, the real heroes were the mechanics. Guys like Neil Parker, Pratt, and Whitney's field rep, who could swap a master rod in a muddy English field with nothing but a chain hoist and a set of banged-up wrenches. They would weld baffles out of scrap, scavenge oil from dead engines, and get those radials turning again for the morning sortie. The logs from the 303rd Bomb Group read like a love letter to American steel, 90% uptime, even with engines shot to hell. That's what unkillable iron looks like. Not just numbers in a maintenance manual, but the difference between a crew eating breakfast in the mess and a crew missing in action. The Radial wasn't built for comfort, it was built to take a beating, spit in the face of physics, and drag you home no matter what. That's kinetic supremacy, and it's why every mechanic who ever turned a wrench on a Pratt or Wright still gets goosebumps just hearing one start up. Lay a Radial and a flat engine side by side, and you will see two different philosophies staring back at you. The Radial is a brute, cylinders marching in a circle, every jug sticking out into the wind like it owns the sky. The flat, or boxer, is a low-slung brawler, all muscle-packed tight and close to the firewall. This is not just a matter of taste, it is geometry, and geometry decides who wins the fight against the air. The secret weapon of the flat engine is frontal area. Take a tape measure to a Lycoming or Continental boxer, and you are looking at about 0.55 square meters of frontal face, barely more than a manhole cover. That is less than half the barn door you get with a 9-cylinder Radial, which can sprawl out over 1.2 square meters or more. These numbers are not just trivia. Every extra square inch up front is another fistful of drag, another reason you need more horsepower just to keep moving. Designers saw the writing on the wall after the war. They started patenting engines that could be tucked in tight under a smooth laminar cowling. US patent 2,435,391, filed by Lycoming in 1948, spelled it out plain: reduce the frontal area, and you cut drag at the root. Suddenly, it was not about how much punishment an engine could take, it was about how little air it had to shove aside at 180 knots. The boxer layout made it possible. Cylinders laid flat, crankshaft running straight down the middle, everything wrapped in a skin of aluminum as slick as a trout. Less area, less drag, more speed for every drop of fuel. That is the math behind the rebellion. The Radial could take a punch, but the flat engine could slip through the air before the fight even started. Run the numbers in a pilot's logbook, and the cold truth jumps out at you. Fuel burn on a typical Lycoming Flat 6 comes in 15, sometimes 20% lower than the old Radials. That is not just a few bucks at the pump, it is hundreds of gallons saved over the course of a season. For a working pilot, that is the difference between stretching a paycheck and burning through it with every hour in the air. Insurance companies caught on fast. A Radial might have the soul of a warhorse, but it is an expensive beast to keep fed. Parts are rare, overhauls come sooner, and every shop visit feels like a roll of the dice. With a flat engine, overhaul intervals stretch out to 2,000, even 2,400 hours before you need to tear down the case. Compare that to a Radial's 1,200, maybe 2,000 hours if you are lucky and gentle on the throttle. That is years of flying before the wrench even comes out of the box. Maintenance tells the same tale. A flat engine keeps its oil inside, runs quieter, and does not paint the belly of your plane black after every flight. Mechanics grumble less, owners sleep better, and every hour in the air feels just a bit more civilized. It is not about romance, it is about reliability, predictability, and keeping the numbers in the black. The Radial was built to survive a gunfight, but the flat engine was built to survive an accountant. In the world of civilian flying, that is what wins the day. There is no cheating physics, no matter how much you love the sound of a big Radial tearing the sky apart. When you want to know why the world traded unkillable iron for a quieter, flatter hum, you have to start with the numbers that rule every airplane's fate. Drag is not the kind you feel in your gut when a prop bites into the wind, it is the cold mathematical force that shows up on every engineer's whiteboard. It is the force that fights you every inch of the way, the faster you go. Here is the hard truth, written in chalk and burned into every flight test report since the dawn of powered flight. Drag is not just about horsepower, it is about how much air you have to shove aside and how cleanly you do it. The formula is simple and unforgiving. Drag equals 1/2 times air density times drag coefficient times frontal area times velocity squared. In formula form, FD equals 1/2 ROCD AV squared. Do not let your eyes glaze over, these are the numbers that sent the Radial to the boneyard. Let us break it down. Rho, the air density at sea level, is 1.225 kilograms per cubic meter. CD, the drag coefficient, measures how slippery or blunt your shape is. A is the frontal area, the size of the wall you are pushing through the sky. V is your speed, squared. That is the killer. Double your speed, and drag goes up by 4. Triple your speed, and you are fighting 9 times as much drag. Every extra square inch of engine sticking out in front multiplies your penalty. That is why a flat engine, tucked tight under a slick cowling, can outrun a radial with half the muscle. The math does not care how tough your engine is, it only cares how much air you are punching through. Stack up the numbers and the story turns ruthless. Take a 1,000 horsepower R2800 Radial, king of the ramp, a slab of American muscle that once hauled bombers over Berlin. Now pitted against a 300 horsepower Lycoming Flat 6, the kind that loafs along in a Cirrus or a Bonanza. Line up the specs. The Radial has a frontal area of about 1.3 square meters, with a drag coefficient hovering around 0.70. The flat engine, tucked behind a slick cowling, barely breaks 0.55 square meters and slides through the air with a drag coefficient of 0.35. Run the drag equation and the numbers start to hurt. At 140 miles per hour, the Radial is pushing against a wall of air so thick it chews up 184 horsepower just to keep moving. The flat engine only loses 39 horsepower to drag. That is a 145 horsepower gap, gone, vanished into thin air before you even think about climbing or turning. Push the throttle harder. At 220 miles per hour, the penalty explodes. The R2800 is now burning 712 horsepower just to punch through the sky. The Lycoming Flat is still only losing 151 horsepower to drag. The gap yawns to 561 horsepower. You read that right, a 1,000 horsepower Radial is clawing just to keep up with a 300 horsepower flat, all because of drag. That is the verdict, plain as steel. The Radial's kinetic supremacy dies on the graph, where horsepower lines cross and never look back. The math does not care about history, it only cares about the air you are shoving aside. Today, every certified airplane engine in production is a flat boxer, efficient, streamlined, obedient to the cold math of drag. But with every passing year, fewer hands remember what true kinetic supremacy felt like. A master rod spinning, 9 cylinders pounding, and unkillable iron dragging men home. Efficiency wins the market, but glory still echoes in every hangar where a Radial barks to life. Drop your stories below, let's keep the legend alive.